Hi everyone, it's Saoirse. I didn't ever expect to be making a video like this less than 2 years after the last one. Um, if you've been around for a while, you will have definitely seen my cat Springer. Um, he has featured in many of my videos, um, and if you don't follow me elsewhere, you might not know what's been going on, but he's no longer with us, and it was really sudden and just not something I was prepared for. Not that you ever can be, but I didn't. It was just the biggest shock that I've ever had to just come home and find him. And so the first thing that I always do when I don't know what else to do is look for other people that have been through something similar. And so I always look for books that could help. And I find that there are so few books about losing an animal companion. There are none at the bookstore. If you just go to a regular store, there's nothing. There are plenty of books on grief, so I bought a lot of them. But you have to go online to find anything about losing an animal and the very particular type of grief that causes. And I don't think it should be that way. I think it should be easier to find resources. And most of them that do exist are like self-published books. There are some great people out there that have published their own stories. So I found some of those. So I don't want to be making this video. I want to be just like picking Springer up and showing you how cute he is. But what I'm going to do, like in the one that I made for Caddy, I'm going to read you what I wrote about him that I posted with his tribute on Instagram. And then I'm going to read some quotes from all the books that I found. I've got, this stack and another one. And we'll just look at some quotes about grief. And then at the end, I've put together a bunch of clips that Springer shows up in from my videos over the past 5.5 years. Okay, this is gonna hurt. So this is what I wrote. My son, my soulmate, my little prince, my best friend. I don't want to be writing this. I want to be holding him, listening to his purr, feeling my heart fill up to the brim with love like it always does when he's near. But fate can be cruel, and my little boy went to rest unexpectedly. I won't be able to hold him again until I join him in the next place. My arms and my heart feel so empty. When I first found Springer, I was 17 and he was a tiny kitten in the courtyard at my high school, feral and running wild with his sister. My class worked together to capture the kittens, and someone handed Springer to me. I remember holding this small black and white bundle of fur with huge nervous eyes. I held him close to my chest and said, I will never let anything happen to you. After his sister Caddy passed from cancer 11 years later, I started altering that phrase to, as long as it's in my power, I won't let anything happen to you. I didn't want to admit that my love wasn't strong enough to save my babies, but I had to face the truth when I lost Caddy. So now, to find out that Springer was taken by a sudden, aggressive, uncommon form of cancer, I'm faced once again with this feeling of helplessness. While I was focused on his heart and taking him to the cardiologist, this horrible disease was beginning, and it would completely blindside us. I once thought I could protect him from everything, and I'm so endlessly sorry that I couldn't. I've lost both of my children to cancer, one after 18 months of fighting, and one without warning. The shock this time is overwhelming. He was here, happy and cuddly and playful, and now he's gone. I never got to see my little man grow old. He will forever be young and full of energy in my memory. For 13 years, he was my cuddle bug. From ages 17 to 30, I got to hold and kiss and love this incredible soul, and he loved me back. That was something I never had to question with Springer. He and Caddy and I were all honestly obsessed with each other. Springer would meow his head off at me every day. He just wanted to talk. He sought me out for cuddles because it comforted him, not because he was hoping for food or treats. I will miss every single thing about him. I told him every day that he was my world, completely perfect in every way. I'll miss how he'd give me headbutts every time I offered my head to him. He'd do it many times in a row, his version of a kiss. I'll miss how he came to check on me and give me headbutts whenever I took a bath. I'll miss watching him bask in his catio, a serene expression on his normally alert face, the sounds of birds chirping all around. I'll miss watching him patiently play with and groom his new little brother Bromley. I'll miss his intelligence, the way he adapted to everything new even if it worried him. I'll miss how he chewed on my fingers but was always gentle when we played. I'll miss his curiosity, his ever-changing funny habits. I'll miss seeing him in the window when I get home. I'll miss how I couldn't sit down without him jumping on my lap, how he trusted me and wanted to be part of everything I did. I'll miss kissing his tiny nose and calling him my goose and marveling at how anything so beautiful could be in my life. Most of all, I will miss spooning with him every night. He knew our routine, and he'd come trotting into the lounge to join me on the couch while I pulled up something to watch on the laptop. He would turn in a circle until he was facing the right way and curl up so I could hold him. We could stay this way for hours. On many days, these were my only moments of happiness and peace. My darling was such a handsome boy. He was a true kawaii cat with his expressive face and big green anime eyes. One of the most unique things about him was the perfect black heart marking on his left shoulder. I've never seen another cat with this mark. It made me feel like he carried a bit of magic with him. This heart felt symbolic. His love was the greatest power in my life. Together we faced the immense loss of his sister. Without him, I could not have done it. He gave me a strength for which I can never thank him enough. My boy guided me through every event, from my teenage years to the start of my 30s. We comforted each other through all the changes and uncertainty. He was my rock, my sure thing. When it felt like nothing and no one loved me, he did. To say I'm lost now is an understatement. The two little beings who knew me better than anyone else have both moved on. I would have done anything to keep them. I'll never understand why we got so much less time than we should have. I always imagined them living into their 20s. But their lives are more important than time. Their legacy will live with me even on the days I don't want to stand and face this world without them. I am never without them. I was lucky to have two soulmates, and to create so many memories with them. I'm comforted knowing that Caddy, forever our guardian, was there to welcome Springer when he departed this life. And I know we will find each other again and again in every lifetime, as we always have. My sweet, precious little goose, my heart will never stop aching for you. I love you beyond words. Grief is such a crazy thing, because there'll be times when you just can't stop crying, and then other times when you're totally shut down and closed off and dissociated and detached. And they talk about the stages of grief, and one thing that they don't mention is that they're not linear, really. You can experience all of them at one time in the span of a few seconds, and it is so exhausting and scary and isolating. So it helps me to find books where people describe the same things that I've been feeling, and we realize that this is a completely universal feeling that everybody will go through at some point. If you've ever loved, then you are going to experience grief. And yet it's taboo, and we don't talk about it. It's like this dark little secret that everybody has, that we've all, or we will all lose someone. And I don't know why that is. I don't know. I mean, I know that, like, in the West especially, we are really, really bad at talking about grief. And there's this stigma around it, and I'm constantly seeing that, like, some people have a really hard time being there for people who are grieving. They don't know what to say. And that's because we approach death like it is like, if we just don't talk about it, it won't happen to us, and it won't affect our lives. Well, that's just not true, because we're all going to do it. And we're all going to lose people to it and lose, our best friends to it. And for some of us, our best friends happen to be animals, and and a lot of people don't understand that. If you've never had a soul bond with an animal, I feel sorry for you, and I hope that you find it one day, because it is the most profound, pure love, uncomplicated love, which we're going to talk about. We're going to get into a lot of these concepts here, so this is going to be a very long video. So I found the first one. We're going to do some that are animal loss and some that are human loss. This first one, I promise it won't always hurt like this. This one is about a woman whose 5-week-old son passed away. So I'm just going to read some things that stood out to me. In the days following Alex's death, I was continually surprised to find myself still alive. It seemed impossible that my body could continue to function when I was experiencing what felt like multiple organ failure. My extremities were numb and tingling, as though my blood had taken one look at the distance required to travel there and decided against it. Something crushed my chest. My ribs were surely broken, my lungs a fraction of their usual size. My breath came shallow and jagged, each inhalation briefer than the one before, each exhalation harder than the last. A dark cloud seeped into my brain like ink through a blotter, fogging my thoughts and weighing down my limbs. In short, I was dying, and yet I did not die, and there were times when that felt like a second cruelty. I thought that was a good description of physical grief, the way that it does completely impact your body and your mind at the same time. It feels very much like there's just, sometimes it feels like there's this weight on my chest, like there's an elephant sitting on me, and other times it feels like my chest is like this empty cavity. There's nothing in there, there's no heart, there's nothing, I just feel completely empty. And you feel sometimes like you are dying, and you just don't, and I like how she said that it felt like a second cruelty. So somebody asked her what her son's name was. I believe this to be the single most important question you can ask someone grieving, yet I can count on one hand the number of people who have asked it. They ask instead, how did he die, as though the cause were more important than the life it took. And that's just an example of people being really insensitive and curious and not knowing the right thing to say, because they put their own curiosity and fear, because I think the reason we ask things like what happened, and especially with animals, people always ask, how old were they? Because they're thinking of their own animal, and they're like doing the math in their head. How many years might I have left? When that's such a cruel question, because you know that if you say they were old, then they're going to justify it and be like, oh, well, good, they had a nice long life. You know, there are people that think that my cats had long lives. They were 11 and 13. To me, that is not long. Because every freaking day I hear people talk about their 20-plus-year-old cats. And the other thing is, stop bringing that up. If somebody lost an animal at a younger age, don't say, oh, my cat's 22. Hope I don't lose them. I'm so lucky they've been... Yeah, you are so lucky that you got a decade longer than me. You're so lucky. I don't need to hear about it. It is just luck that they didn't get cancer. That there wasn't something incurable wrong with them. It's just luck, so stop. Stop bringing that up, please. So she talks about how grief is really ugly. She says, I'm not proud of it, but grief isn't all soft focus walks through graveyards and quiet sobbing over kitchen tables. Grief isn't romantic, it's painful and ugly, as often filled with anger and bitterness as love. Unless someone tells you the terrible thoughts they've had, you will imagine you're the only one, and grief is lonely enough without that. Beneath every promise in this book is one underlying principle. I promise to be honest with you. And that's very true. I've had a lot of ugly thoughts. And one of the things that, that people don't want to talk about is like sometimes when you're grieving, it is really hard to be happy for other people and to hear about their successes and their joys. And it's the reason I turn to books like this is because it's easier to hear about people who are suffering and know what it's like. That's a lot more comforting. And I really, really liked this book because she's formatted it in like 18 promises about grief. So some of them, I promise that you won't always lie awake at night sobbing until you cannot breathe. I promise you won't always feel so guilty. I promise you'll find someone who understands. So I really liked the format of this. So after she loses her son had a twin, and she's constantly worried about him. Every morning and after every nap, I stood with my hand on the door performing a silent ritual I'm almost too embarrassed to share with you. In a moment, I'll walk in, I'd say to myself, and he won't be breathing. I would play out the subsequent scene, the emergency call, the ambulance, the somber faces of doctors who've done their best. I'd steel myself against the worst-case scenario, and only when I was certain I was ready would I open the door. Every morning and after every nap, for years. And that's something that when you experience a traumatic loss, a sudden loss, or even not sudden, one that is, due to an illness that takes a long time, you can become so paranoid. And I find myself so scared to walk in that front door. I didn't even want to be in my house at all after this happened. And, I would like sit in the driveway in my car and not want to go into the house because, what if something happened to Bromley? If you don't know, I lost Caddy in 2022, and the next year, about 8 months later, I adopted a kitten for Springer. I got him his own kitten because I felt he really needed a playmate, and Bromley's only a year old, and now he's lost his best friend and his big brother. And now anytime I see him or any cat like lying down taking a nap, I'm just like checking, like, are you breathing? And I'm so scared. And that, for me, that hasn't gone away since all the trauma of Caddy's illness. I am always just very paranoid and hyper aware, and it hurts that even though I am like that, I still wasn't able to see this and stop it. Several years after Alex died, I felt a burning inside me as I inched forward on a beltway snarled up with traffic. It struck me that anger felt very much like grief in the way it rose like floodwater, that anxiety too behaved in the same insidious way. Unlike cheerfulness or joy, which can land in an instant, these uncomfortable emotions seep through our veins and drown us from the inside. By the time I reached open roads, golden fields, stretching on either side, I could barely breathe. I was not angry with the traffic or with the difficult day I'd had at work. I was angry with life, angry with whatever twist of fate had given my son an infection, had made that infection take over every part of his brain, angry that he had died while others lived, that his death was a moment, yet my grief would last forever, angry that I still felt this way after so much time. Alone in the car, away from the traffic, I screamed, the sort of scream that would bring people running, that would scare dogs and frighten children. A scream that belonged in horror movies and murder mystery dinners. I recommend it. So it's so true that it does feel a lot like anger. I've been so irritable and just pissed off at everything. And in the first days, I was doing a lot of screaming. That was the first thing I did. The first thing I did was just scream and scream, and I couldn't believe. It was like a disbelief and horror. And then, in the following days, I would be driving and I would do my screaming in the car because that's kind of the safest place to do it because you don't worry anybody. Nobody can hear you. So she talks about, what the silly things that people say and don't say in the wake of tragedy. Our loved ones haven't gone to a better place. The best place was here by our side, and if the world wasn't a happy place for them, then the world should have changed. Of course, we didn't want our babies, our parents, our siblings, our friends to suffer, but neither did we want them to die. Platitudes have cost me friendships. There has been no dramatic parting of ways, but grief and the way others react to it can make us feel differently about people. Life is too short, we realize, to spend it with those who don't make us feel good or who minimize our pain in order to relieve their own discomfort. Come on now, one of my friends used to say whenever I was falling. Let's talk about something less depressing. Well, that would be nice, wouldn't it? To switch off our heads so we aren't crying inside even when we're smiling. To erase the sadness from our hearts and replace it with kittens and unicorns. That's not our reality. Our reality is a pain that will be with us forever. Grief is a chronic, debilitating illness with symptoms that come and go. It can't be cured, only managed. So that's another thing that I find people don't talk about very much, is that you will lose friendships. Because to me, there's no excuse for if you call somebody genuinely your friend, not just kind of an acquaintance, somebody you barely know, if they're your friend, and you say nothing to them when they're grieving, when you know that they're reaching out and you do nothing and say nothing, and you're not there for them in any way, that you're not a friend. You're just a person silently witnessing someone suffer and not saying anything. So it does reveal a lot, and it's a second tragedy, because then you lose people that you thought were going to be in your life for a long time. But you can't hold on to what isn't there. And a lot of people, they don't understand. Again, like people who have never experienced grief somehow. I don't know how people have gotten to my age and haven't experienced it. They don't get it, and so they don't think you can be suffering that badly because they've never felt it. So they're just like, death to them is a concept that's just never touched their life, and or they don't realize that in a lot of cases it is harder to lose an animal because the animal is with you all the time. The animal sees you at your best, at your worst. When you're just doing stuff around the house, they see you at your most. You're your most true self with them, and they know your whole life routine and everything about you. Whereas, like, if you have a relative who you haven't spent that much time with, you might love them, but they're not a part of your everyday life. It can be easier to cope with their death than an animal's, and some people just don't know or accept that. Yeah. Grief brain is, as the young people say, a thing. It is as much a phenomenon as the baby brain, given as a self-deprecating explanation by many mothers in the immediate aftermath of a new arrival. The adjective is interchangeable. Divorce brain, exam nerves brain, first love brain, preoccupations and obsessions that consume us so completely there is no room for anything else. Nothing else is important. And it's especially bad at the very beginning, and it can hit you over time too when you think you're doing better, and suddenly it's just like you have this fog where you just can't think, you can't remember things, or you are just completely consumed with reliving the traumatic moments. And it can be like when you wake up in the morning and you are hit with that weight on your chest that they're gone and they're not coming back, and it is so horrific to think about because they were always right there, especially with an animal. I would wake up every day and Springer would be right next to me. He was the first thing that I would see when I opened my eyes. He was the last thing I saw when I closed my eyes at night. So waking up to a different reality is beyond painful. So I went online and I found this book, The Book of Pet Love and Loss. And this is one of maybe two or three traditionally published books that I've been able to find on this subject, which just makes no sense to me. So in this book, there's quotes from well-known people, and it's about their connection with their animals. So this is from E.B. White. How do we make sense of the desolation that sets in so quickly? The bond is unlike any other relationship in our lives. When we're kids, sometimes our dearest friend and closest ally is the family pet. I can still see my first dog in all the moods and situations that memory has filed him away in, recalled E.B. White. For 6 years, he met me at the same place after school and convoyed me home, a service he thought up himself. An animal's love is deep, uncomplicated, unconditional, and forgiving, blessedly unburdened by the complexities of human dynamics. Affection without ambivalence is how Sigmund Freud described the connection. No matter how awful the day or how awful I am behaving at any given moment, George doesn't care, writes the journalist John Dickerson. He finds me smoldering in my chair and dashes to my lap. Every dog is a rescue dog. Perhaps poet Mary Oliver summed it up best. I think they are companions in a way that people aren't. They'll lie next to you when you're sad, and they remind us that we're animals too. That's something that I think people forget all too often. We are animals, and as much as we try to separate ourselves from that reality and talk about how we're superior because we made iPhones and dishwashers, like, we're, at the end of the day, animals that I think have evolved much too far to the point where we have the capacity to destroy the planet and think nothing of it. So when we commune with animals, I think it brings us back to what is truly important, what we are in our real nature, at our core. And that is, one of many creatures that is part of this world. When I was little and didn't have a sister yet, my best friend was a brown, wire-haired mongrel named Mitzi. We shared joyous times, exciting times, and sad times. We got scared together when there was thunder and lightning, and together we crawled under the bed until they went away. When I wasn't scared of them anymore, Mitzi still was, so I comforted her and felt all the braver. And that's from Fred Rogers. And I think that's a great quote to show us that animals make us kind. And braver. They give us some of our best qualities, and that's why I don't tend to trust people who don't like animals, who choose not to have one for any other reason than, like, it doesn't work with their traveling lifestyle at the moment or something. Like, if they're completely stable in where they live and they just don't want an animal in their house, I just don't really trust those people as much. Because the most compassionate people, I think, are the ones who have strong bonds with animals. Because, like they're saying, like, animals are so uncomplicated in the way that they give love. They are the best teachers of love. So who is this? Liberace. By 1976, he counted 14 canines in his care. 10 years later, that number had multiplied. If somebody were to ask me why a single man needs so many homes, I could reply it's because I have so many children, 21 to be exact, he wrote in his memoir. I'd better explain that my children are my dogs, and I couldn't love them more if I'd sired the whole litter. On tour, he missed his animals tremendously. When I travel, I carry framed pictures of them to place around the hotel suites. I call home long distance just to speak to them. When they hear the sound of my voice on the phone, they literally go crazy. My dog and my mongoose were my sole companions. Fresh from the jungle, the latter grew up at my side, slept in my bed, and ate at my table. No one can imagine the affectionate nature of a mongoose. My little pet was familiar with every minute of my day-to-day life. She tramped all over my papers and raced after me all day long. She curled up between my shoulder and my head at siesta time and slept there the fitful electric sleep of wild animals. That's from Pablo Neruda. I like that because it shows that it isn't just dogs and cats that we can develop strong bonds with. And I've noticed that, if somebody has only ever loved one species of animal, they can find it difficult to understand why somebody would be broken up about another species. I have cats, and that's who I am. But if somebody is equally grieving over their bearded dragon, I would never judge them. Like, I don't understand judging somebody over what they're grieving. That's crazy to me to judge anybody because, like, you think their animal isn't as, like, furry and cuddly, so they shouldn't be sad about losing them. Get out of here with that nonsense. What does that say? I can't imagine my life without my cat. It's as though it doesn't make sense. If someone asked me to truly describe myself in an abstract frame, next to me there would be a small mark like a smudge, and that small mark would be my cat. That's Tracy Eamon. I love that. That is such a great way of saying it. When you have that kind of connection, they're a part of you. They define you in a way. And that's one of the things that I'm struggling with so much is that my definition of myself was a person who was a mom to two cats, two feral cats that I took from my high school courtyard. That's who I was since I was 17. Most of my memory, almost half my life. And I don't want to be anything else. I don't want that identity to change. And one of the books says that death ends, it ends like a life, not a relationship. So you still have that relationship. It's just not physical anymore. You can't hold the animal, can't kiss them, but you can still tell them you love them. But it's hard to know who I am anymore. Dogs have such short lifespans. It's like a concentrated version of a human life. When they get older, they become much more like our mothers. They wait for us, watch out for us, are completely fascinated by everything we do. So with Lucille, she's the kid I never got to be and the mother I never quite had. It's really quite remarkable how much they can provide without any prompting. It's just built into the species. That's Caroline Knapp. So it's true that they can play every role in our lives, and that's why the loss of them is so complex, and it's difficult to put into words because they can just be absolutely everything to us. And, that's what I told Springer every day, that he was everything. He was my world. He was my child and my best friend, but he also took care of me. He really took care of me. It is exceedingly short, his galloping life. Dogs die so soon. I have my stories of that grief. No doubt many of you do also. It is almost a failure of will, a failure of love to let them grow old, or so it feels. We would do anything to keep them with us and to keep them young, the one gift we cannot give. And that's Mary Oliver. She has written so much beautiful poetry about her dogs. What does that say? My handwriting has not gotten better ever. Anyone who has ever been in a similar position to mine and who has seen his or her animal carry on a difficult fight can only love and respect that animal more, particularly when you realize that it takes a very special kind of courage. It takes a courage which is very different from human courage, but is, if anything, more worthy of admiration, because human courage comes at least armed with some knowledge, whereas animal courage often comes with no knowledge at all, not even in the case of disease, knowledge of what it is they fight. That's from Cleveland Amory. And that struck me in thinking about Caddy. She knew, or she didn't know what her illness was, and she just fought it for a year and a half. And to not know or to have the words for it, but to just have to trust it just showed such bravery, and I'll never know exactly what Springer felt, if he suspected anything. I've been told it was very, very fast, very sudden, and in the end, painless, which gives me some peace. But I'll always wonder. If he was trying to tell me something. Because his behavior was a little bit strange for a couple weeks. But he always had these funny little habits that he would go in and out of. And, you just wish that they could tell you everything. Once again, a member of my family whose first days I remember well is living out her last beside me. That's from Irving Townsend. I really loved that one. For those of us who are lucky enough to have known our animal companions from the very beginning, it just seems impossible that their whole life could have already happened, that it's all over and we knew them from when they were small. Even when we try to prepare for the loss, the depth of grief can be overwhelming. For 19th century naturalist John Burroughs, the death of his dog Nip stunned him. It was one of the worst shocks I ever had, he recorded in his journal. For a moment, the whole universe seemed bereft, and my whole outlook upon life changed. In their absence, our days are reshaped overnight. Our shared rituals become irrelevant. Journalist Natalie Angier describes it as a sorrow of details, of minor rhythms and assumptions that I hadn't really been aware of until suddenly they were disrupted or unmet. Ernest Hemingway's dog was no longer lying by his side as he typed his manuscripts, or chasing lizards by the pool, or resting his chin on the writer's foot when he read at night. I miss Black Dog as much as I miss any friend I ever lost, he confessed. That the world keeps spinning in spite of this tremendous loss feels disorienting, even absurd. You don't realize how much a dog's presence defines the contours of your home until, in its absence, the walls seem to relocate themselves. You don't realize how many of your unconscious gestures, a glance into a certain backyard corner, a moment of extra care on the stair landing, are calibrated to your dog's internal GPS. That's from Megan Dawn. And this is because they are our home. For a week, while my mom was away, I went and stayed at her house, and I brought Bromley with me, and I would come back here to check the mail. The first time that I walked into this house, and it was totally empty, and there was no cat in this house, nobody greeting me, and I've lived here for almost 4 years, and to see it like that, it was like I didn't recognize this place. It was just like a tomb. I didn't want to be here. And it's still really, really hard for me to be here, but seeing it empty like that without another living soul, it didn't make any sense to me anymore, because every single inch of this house has a memory of Caddy and Springer, places that they would lie and things that they enjoyed, and so many sight lines where I could be in one spot and I would know if I looked in that direction they might be over there, and just so many places where I knew to look for them. And that's because they were my home, not this structure. Ordinarily, the death of a cat means little to most men, a lot to fewer men, but to me and that cat, it was exactly and no lie and sincerely like the death of my little brother. I loved Tyke with all my heart. He was my baby who as a kitten just slept in the palm of my hand, with his little head hanging down, or just purring for hours, just as long as I held him that way. And that was Jack Kerouac. When I was in the ditch, my friend Susan told me to find old pictures of Rose, pictures of when she was healthy and young. If you flip through the pages, you see us aged together, always the two of us, Rose in my lap, Rose at my side, other people moving in and out of the frame over time, while my hand forever rests on Rose. I love that. That our animals are loyal and ever present. And one of the things that would strike me all the time was when I would look at old photos, from a decade ago, and see what I looked like and how I was so different. And I knew, behind just what I looked like, what my brain was like at the time. And, I've had depression for most of my life, so I knew the bad things that were going on behind these pictures. And in every picture, my cats looked the same. Sometimes they'd be a little chunkier than at other times, but their markings, their face, they always looked like themselves. So they never changed over all these years where I was changing rapidly in every photo, and they just never did. And like they were these timeless beings, and they never got old, so they never looked like elderly cats. They're just they were that constant in my life, and that's the hardest thing to wrap my brain around. Is time was passing and things were changing, and it was like, how could this girl in like 2012 at 18 years old, who was absolutely nuts in a certain way, like how could the cats be in that photo and then in a photo 10 years later? It just didn't, it doesn't make sense. They're just eternal. Weeks have passed and the pain has not subsided. Every time I think about it, my heart starts racing and I feel like I just got stabbed in the chest. It's a jolt still. Gracie's death. That was Oprah Winfrey. And it was helpful to read this book and read about people who I didn't know had such a connection with animals. And there's a kitty. So it was nice. It's like, it's one of those things that doesn't matter how much money you have or your status in life, who you are. We all have the capability to form a connection, a really strong connection with animals. This one was one of my favorites that I found, and this one's not animal related, but I really, really loved this. It's called Forget Prayers Bring Cake, A Single Woman's Guide to Grieving. And I saw that title and I was like, that is so specific, and thank you for writing that, because grieving alone is so hard. And she points this out at the very beginning. She says, when my amazing 103-year-old grandmother passed, I was bereft and sought the care of a local chaplain. This is what she told me. When my father died, I fell into my husband's arms. He held me. I still need him when the feelings get hard. I don't think it's healthy that you are all alone. How can you possibly grieve this way? The message I heard loud and clear in the heteronormative world that shaped me was the best way to grieve is in the arms of a man. The best way is the married way, of course. And that upsets me so much, and it is one of the things that makes it hard to kind of like talk to anybody right now, because a lot of people do have a partner and their only experience of grieving is grieving in that person's arms. So as somebody who has been single a long time, and for whom their most important relationships and closest relationships are with animals, it's really hard to be in a world where people say stuff like that. How can you grieve? How can you grieve this way when you're not married? Well, it's not exactly a choice. This is just the way it is. So I just love that she wrote this book. I can't recommend it enough. The single woman betrays the patriarchal economic and social order, and for that, and for being an emblem of aloneness, of the horrid possibility of loneliness, people fear her. And I do believe people fear her, the solitary woman, just as they often fear the griever, an emblem of the suffering we so badly want to forget is coming. We kind of get forgotten in society, and it is because people don't want to look at us, and they don't want to face the fact that, oh God, that could happen to me. I could be a spinster, you know, or I could be facing the death of my closest loved one. Better not look too close at that. I found myself wanting someone to hold me. I wanted someone to listen to the pain. I wanted meals. I wanted help buying toilet paper. I wanted witness, hand-holding, someone I could love when the people I cared for most were slipping away. I called a friend who was also navigating parental illness to cry, to share this horrible news, and she started telling me what to do almost immediately. Even though I knew in my heart she only wanted to help, it left me more panicked and less trusting of myself. So, yeah, when you're going through this, a lot of people just want people to care, and it's already hard enough even when you are experiencing loss of a human. People don't know what to say, but typically there is a little more understanding, and when it's an animal, it's just like crickets. You know, you hear from the people who have experienced it. You hear from the people whose hearts have also been ripped out and broken by the loss of an animal companion. But from everybody else, silence. They don't get it, and you're not getting lasagnas on the doorstep. You know, you're not getting calls and cards and letters and offers to help you do the most basic things because you're shut down and you can't do anything. You don't really get that. I just think that's so wrong. And I know that I reach out to people, and I think one of the most interesting things is that, like, the people who have been there for me the most, some of them have been virtual strangers. And I'm so grateful to them. Everyone that I've heard from, who I barely know, who are reaching out to me, while some of the people who should be the closest are totally distant and quiet. And I always, like, if somebody that I see, like if I follow somebody on social media, even if I don't know them very well, and they post something that they're suffering, I always do something. Say something. The least you can do is throw a little heart on the story just to say, like, I see you. The least you can do. I mean, some people just can't do the bare minimum, and I don't understand that, but it's common, I guess. Loss doesn't wait for good timing. It will come during a breakup or a divorce when you break your foot in the midst of ongoing oppressive forces. It won't wait for the right moment. It will sit with the other losses, drudge them up. Like life, like death, is going to happen. Yeah, when it rains, it pours. And I had this horrible feeling just a few weeks before it happened, because a couple of really bad things happened. Looking back, not that bad, but things at the time were very bad. A couple of them happened like on the same day, and I thought, this is not a good sign, because everything always has to happen at once, doesn't it? So you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. So when it did happen, I was almost like, what? This doesn't make any sense. Like, I thought, you know, my stupid paranoid thoughts about, like, oh, everything bad has to happen at once, those are just stupid paranoid thoughts, right? So that when it really did happen, I couldn't, like, I still can't believe it. How fragmented is too fragmented? How much are we allowed to crumble and fall apart and grieve before we're disinvited to dinner? How can we make friends when we are a total splintered mess? When to stay home, when to go out, when is it okay to tell a stranger the truth, and how much of the truth? I wish there was one blanket answer. So some people will say that they're there for you, but how long can they do that? How long can they handle it? You know, I've been just kind of isolating myself because I know that after a certain amount of time, you know, the messages stop coming, and people expect you to be better and to not be so difficult to be around. So there's very few people that can deal with a person grieving for a long period of time. Any death, any horror, any trauma will rupture the fabric of our lives. The clinging to, I want things back to normal, is strange wishful thinking, because normal before included my father alive. that pre-dad's death normal would not return. Never ever again, because forevermore the new normal was life without a father. This is the time to say goodbye to normal and to not wait for it to resume. Normal as you know it has ceased to exist, and it will take time for a new normal to be born, in which your newly altered reality is integrated into the everyday basics of your life. That is such a hard transition. When you have known things to be one way, and they're just not that way anymore. Nothing's normal, and there is no going back. I keep having that thought of just there's no going back ever to the way things were before, when that's all I want. So I'm being like, it's like I've just been put on this train and just sent off and pushed into this future that I don't recognize and don't want, where my life looks nothing like it did before, and I'm not interested in it. But I don't have a choice because I've been put on this train and I can't get off of it. Even though buried, he was everywhere. His things in the house, his habits, his favorite tree, his favorite store, his favorite art gallery. Strangers in stores realizing who I was told me my dad was crazy and wonderful, that they called him Padrino. When I got in his car, it was filled with trash from when he was alive. The trash was so grotesque to me, somehow made my father's absence wholly irrational. He was just here. This is his mess. Where the fuck is my dad? That, I kept saying that. I still say it. Where are you? Like, I'm just looking for him. You look around and, like, his things are still here, and just as he left them, and I don't know. It's a universal feeling, though. Like, when you lose somebody, it just does not seem to make sense because the physical proof that they were here is all around you. One thing is for certain, I will never again feel like I felt when my father was alive. But it was at this part of the process I was ready to step forward into my future, even if that meant without my dad. As my mother always says, where one branch breaks, another grows in its place. We are, in this process of grieving, reborn within ourselves. Part of us forever missing as new parts emerge. So yeah, you have to accept a new self. You have to become a new self because the person you were is just, you can't be that person anymore, unfortunately. And in this next book, they talk about like how to take the best parts of the animal that you lost, and you could apply it to the person you lost to, and take those attributes and try to embody that yourself so that you bring the best parts of them forward into the future. So this is one of the like self-published ones I found on Amazon, and I Love You Still, a thoughtful guide and remembrance journal for healing the loss of a pet. And this is by somebody who like has a PhD in studying grief, specifically canine loss, but she includes a lot of stories about people and their cats in here. For those fortunate to have experienced the deep bond and unconditional love of a companion animal, the death that follows can be one of the most difficult and misunderstood losses to go through. Even though companion animals are valued members of our family, this devastating loss oftentimes goes unrecognized and is rarely taken with the seriousness it deserves. This loss is disregarded as insignificant and is trivialized by family, friends, and society, leaving grieving pet owners struggling with healthy ways to cope and limited professional resources available. Chances are, if you're reading this book, you too have experienced the impact of this devastating loss. You understand on a very personal level the grief experienced after losing a companion animal is minimized and dismissed with a pat on the back and a suggestion to just get another one. Because of the disenfranchised nature of companion animal loss, there are few, if any, professionally written books or reflective journals addressing the difficulties unique to those grieving the loss of a beloved companion animal. When we lose a human loved one, we can expect to find countless resources in books written by mental health professionals, yet in the case of companion animal loss, this is not so. I just don't understand how that can still be the case. I really don't understand it. How many times have you been told in response to your loss that it's just a dog or cat, just get another one, why are you not over it yet? Or pets don't live as long as humans do. These insensitive and disenfranchising comments in response to companion animal loss illustrate the ignorance that prevails in our society, even today, regarding the significance of the human-animal bond. It is not so much whether our loss is human or animal, but more about the nature and meaning of our relationship to and with the deceased that informs our grief. If we are to understand why the loss of a companion animal can be one of the most difficult events of our lives, we need to consider the extraordinary bond and multidimensional relationship we share with our companion animals. Those who have been graced by the presence of a companion animal in their lives can appreciate that there are as many reasons to love them as there are stars in the sky. Being so much more than pets, they are treasured family members. We acknowledge their contribution to individual and family morale. We derive closeness to, accept responsibility for, and share activities with. We become emotionally devoted to them, and naturally we grieve when they die. Our companion animals are faithful, reliable, devoted, comforting, loyal, trustworthy, gentle, kind, and the ultimate knower of love. Our relationship with them is deep and wide. To us, they are not like our children, they are our children. We see and interact with them more than some family members or friends. We are their world, and they are ours. Our companion animals were there for us when we needed someone. We were with them from the beginning to their end, and perhaps for the first time in our lives, we experienced unconditional love and positive regard. The depth and nature of our relationship with our companion animals may be like no other relationship in life, and when they die, it can leave a hole in our lives the size of the Grand Canyon. So, yeah, you can see why it can be harder to lose an animal if we're closer to them than we were to a person, and that they can be everything to us. They can fill so many different roles at one time. And I like how she talks about how science backs up this connection. But what exactly takes place when we interact with a companion animal that makes us feel so good? Researchers speculate that the levels of oxytocin, which is known as the love or cuddle hormone that is released when people snuggle up or bond socially, increases, as does the production of the feel-good brain chemical called serotonin. A research study at Azabu University in Japan shows that oxytocin levels rose significantly when owners and dogs gazed at each other and had a profound effect on both owners and their dogs. Of the dyad that spent the most amount of time looking into each other's eyes, dogs experienced a 130% rise in oxytocin levels, and owners experienced a 300% increase. This supports the existence of a self-perpetuating oxytocin-mediated positive feedback loop in human-dog relationships that is similar to that of human mother-infant relationships. In other words, our love grows stronger and deeper with our canine companions the longer we spend time with them. Is it any surprise that we grieve so deeply when this bond is broken through death or other permanent separation? While this research did not include cats or other companion animals, I would think a very similar physiological experience would occur, and I imagine most cat parents would agree. Yes, 100%. The, just indescribably through the roof, explosive feeling of love that I had when I held my babies, and when I looked into their eyes, and then when they would do that slow blink to me that tells me that they're feeling the same thing, or when they would seek me out, just to lie on me, not for anything else, just to be near me, and the way that they would purr, and they were so content and happy. I mean, that love was just enormous, limitless. So she talks about how we're not, always able to express our grief over an animal in the same way as we can over a human because it is not accepted. Some of the factors that separate companion animal loss from human loss are that our loss and grief are disenfranchised from communal supports. As grieving pet owners, we do not have a formal way to publicly memorialize and mourn our loss, and we are forced to say goodbye to many different relationships at the same time. These differences can set the stage for a number of emotional and psychological difficulties, such as complicated grief reactions, PTSD, depression, and anxiety. Yeah, again, it's just unfair. This is from one of the, she included a bunch of like personal accounts of people, so this is one of those. When Chauncey died, there was none of those things. None. There was no funeral, no viewing, no way of paying respect and saying goodbye, no cards, no flowers, no real support. I was expected to drop a few tears and be okay in a few days. I was so filled with anger and hurt, and then later shame. I made a point to let everyone know how bad I was hurting and how he really was my son, the only child I ever had. For me, it was like losing my child, and I just remember not getting a single card or anything from people who were supposed to care about me. The first time I saw my sister-in-law after Chauncey died, she did not even ask how I was doing. It was life as usual for everyone, that is, everyone but me. I don't get it. I don't get why people are like that. Why would you not even ask how they're doing? Why would you pretend? I think people are just so uncomfortable. Either they truly don't think you could possibly still be grieving, so they don't even think of it, or they're just so uncomfortable with the idea that you are grieving, because grief is beyond just feeling bummed out. It's like having your soul ripped in half, and that is not a feeling that people want anything to do with, so they just avoid it. During this initial stage, it is common to experience things such as emotional numbness, feeling emotionally frozen, denial, or repression of painful emotions. During this stage, it is also common to experience dissociative symptoms such as derealization, depersonalization, observing what is going on from afar, or being in an emotional, cognitive fog or dreamlike state. Many grieving pet owners also find themselves searching and calling out for their beloved companion animal in an effort to reaffirm the reality that they are gone and break through the shock and denial. The experience of shock and denial is commonly mistaken for lack of caring or feeling, but it is important to understand that emotional numbness is a protective response to the trauma that will lessen over time. So that's a phase that I keep going in and out of, is like just being totally distanced from reality and being dissociated and kind of feeling like if I just don't think and don't connect to my life, then none of this happened. It's not real. Because it was so sudden. It's like if I just like turn around real quick, I'll see him. Like he'll just be coming around the corner. Like I just have to catch him quick enough. And then when you're in this state, when you're really detached, it can look like you're functioning and you're okay because you're not crying and falling apart, so people can think you're doing fine, and then they're like, cool, let's just do fun stuff again and you can be your normal self and we don't have to talk about this anymore. And yeah, that's not happening. So it's almost like, I felt like this with Caddy, and now I feel like I just have to run away and start over and like meet new people who never knew me before, because it's just too painful to talk to people who knew me and don't understand and like can never understand. Make a list of all the qualities you most admire about your companion animal. From that list, envision ways that you can continue to bring those attributes and qualities forth into the world. In doing so, you create a living memory of your companion animal, and they will continue to live on through your actions and intentions. Remember, moving on is not about leaving behind or letting go. It is about continuing to honor your relationship in a way that recognizes all your beloved brought to your life and the world. What better way to do that than to become the things you most admire about them? And I like that, the idea of like being, if your animal was really brave or really silly or really sweet, just bringing those attributes out in yourself and trying to honor them that way. So the next one is called Comfort, A Journey Through Grief. And in this one, Anne Hood talks about her 5-year-old daughter Grace, who died suddenly from a virulent form of strep throat, which is unimaginable. She says here, while Grace was in ballet, Lauren's car was stolen out of a parking lot. What a day, I remembered saying when he told me. That uneasy feeling of things happening in threes came to me, but I dismissed it. So that idea of things happening in threes, like having a premonition, I had that, like I said. These two things happened, and then I literally thought, anything happens to Springer, I can't handle it. It can't be that. Please don't let it be that. So it feels ridiculous. It just feels so absurd. And like the universe is not even being creative. Like, really? You know, the thing that I was afraid of, that's what you did. And I had a lot of guilt before I got the results back and found out what happened. I had, my brain was just going everywhere thinking, if I had that premonition, why didn't I do anything? And I'd planned to take him to the vet. I was going to call the vet the day after I lost him. That was my plan. And obviously I was too late. Now that I have the results and I know what happened, I know that I couldn't have done anything. That this kind of cancer, you almost never find it until it's too late, and if you find it, there's really no way to treat it. So I have to stop beating myself up, but it's like, I didn't even have a chance to fight for him. And maybe, I don't know. That's one thing they talk about in a lot of these books, is all the unknowns and all the, if I had done this, could this have been different? And it'll drive you insane. Sam, unable to return to his own room in the bunk beds he and Grace had so happily shared, began to sleep in the guest room or on the pull-out sofa, the same place where I often spent afternoons hiding under the covers and cushions. My house, littered with Grace's artwork and clothes, no longer seemed safe. One afternoon, I wandered into Sam's room and found her ballet leotards in a tangle on the floor by the bottom bunk, and her glasses on the bedside table, where I had put them just a few nights earlier. So I totally understand this. Like, the home just feels like a foreign place and, like, almost dangerous. I can't stop replaying those steps I took into the house and turning the corner, and so I'm scared to go into certain places. And for the first week, I literally slept outside in the catio, and it was getting hot. It's already very, very hot here, and I just put up a little fan and, brought some cozy things out, and I would sleep out there, and Bromley would stay out all night in the catio as well. Yeah, it's just the way that grief changes your home and everything that felt safe before and makes it something like evil. It's just awful. So a big thing that helped her in her grief was knitting. I learned to knit while sitting in the corner of a busy yarn shop in a seaside town 30 miles from my Providence home. When I stood up to leave, 2 hours had passed, the first 2 hours in months that I hadn't spent crying or cursing or reliving the horrible tragedy that had taken over my life. A week later, I was struggling through a scarf. I made a mess of it, randomly adding stitches, dropping stitches, then adding even more. When I showed up with this tangle of wool, Jen pulled it off the needle, and all my mistakes were miraculously gone. I could start anew. Unlike life, or at least this new life of mine, in which I was forced to keep moving forward through the mess it had become, knitting allowed me to start over again and again. until whatever I was making looked exactly as I wanted it to look. I love that. And I find something similar, like if I'm not doing something creative with my hands, the grief is just all consuming. And there's a little bit of relief when you can do something manual. So I made this dress. You can't really see much of it, but I've been learning to sew this year, and I'm very into like Victorian mourning practices, and people don't really like go into mourning so much anymore and wear black for a long period of time, but I really wanted to make a mourning dress. So I did, and it like has a lining, like it's got a white lining because I wanted the white for Springer's fur, and there's a white ruffle on the bottom, and I added pockets and a belt. I put like buttons to put the straps on, and it took me like one evening, and for that whole time I was so gloriously like manic about making this dress that even though the grief was there, it had only been a few days. I was like, I have a purpose right now. I have to do this thing. And yeah, I can't recommend that enough. Like learning to do something with your hands when you're grieving, it is so helpful. Grief is not linear. People kept telling me that once this happened or that passed, everything would be better. Some people gave me 1 year to grieve. They saw grief as a straight line with a beginning, middle, and end, but it is not linear. It is disjointed. One day you are acting almost like a normal person. You may even manage to take a shower. Your clothes match. You think the autumn leaves look pretty or enjoy the sound of snow crunching under your feet. Then a song, a glimpse of something, or maybe even nothing sends you back into the hole of grief. It is not 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It is a jumble. It is hours that are all right and weeks that aren't. Or it is good days and bad days. Or it is the weight of sadness making you look different to others and nothing helps. Just another reminder. It is, it doesn't go like shock, denial, depression, whatever it is. It is so messy. And you feel like a mess, and you feel crazy, and you feel so scattered and all over the place. So she goes to the wedding of her former nanny. And I think it's like in California. Is it California? Somewhere in the West, so there's a lot of fires going on, and it might change the plans of the wedding. She was optimistic, her new life about to unfold amid this ash and these mountains. Why shouldn't she be optimistic? Why shouldn't she believe the fires would change direction and spare her? And that's something people who don't know grief, who don't know the shock of sudden loss, untimely loss, they can tend to be a lot more optimistic. And those of us who do know that the worst case scenario, that your worst fear can absolutely come true, those of us who know that can be a little more cautious and paranoid, unfortunately. We would see the clouds of ash and think, well, that's it. The wedding is probably going to be canceled because the fires are coming. And then at the end of that same chapter, I nodded, remembering those wildfires at her wedding. I never actually saw them. I just knew they were out there. Once I would have believed that of course they would stay away. I would have believed that danger could be averted. And that's just a belief that you don't have the luxury of having anymore. The first time I walked into Grace's room after she died, when the reality of what had happened to us in the past 48 hours was still unbelievable, the first things I saw were those tights. I saw them and I screamed. Not the kind of scream that comes from fright, but the kind that comes from the deepest grief imaginable. It is a scream that comes when there are no words to express what you feel. It is an argument with God, or life, or death. It is a scream that rails against logic and fate and everything there is. I saw those tights, I screamed. I closed the door to the room, hard. Then I sat on the floor in the hallway outside Grace's room and I cried. You don't know You know, you can, like, I don't know if other people do this, like, imagine what their reaction will be when something horrible happens. You have no idea. You just don't know until the very second that you're faced with this thing that you feared. You don't know what's going to come out of you. And for a lot of people, it is just screaming horror, and it's this disbelief. Yeah. Time passes and I am still not through it. Grief isn't something you get over. You live with it. You go on with it lodged in you. Sometimes I feel like I have swallowed a pile of stones. Grief makes me heavy. It makes me slow. Even on days when I laugh a lot or dance or finish a project or meet a deadline or celebrate or make love, it is there, lodged deep inside of me. Time has passed, and I am living a life again back in the world. So no matter what, you're never quite the same. And that's what we're seeing throughout these books, is like you kind of have to find a new you that fits into this new reality that doesn't make sense and that you're probably not interested in being part of. And then I showed this one in the video I made about Caddy, but I just want to show it again because this is one, I believe, a self-published book that I found, less than 2 years ago, and it comforted me so much. It's called Soul Comfort for Cat Lovers, Coping Wisdom for Heart and Soul After the Loss of a Beloved Feline. And it is so specific because it's hard enough to find books about animal loss, but to find a book that is just about cats, it's very, very specific, and it really helped me. So I'll just read a few things from there. I don't know if they're the same ones I read before. So they talk about the relationship others can't see. Our friendships with our cats can be very intimate and loyal, yet our cats can seem rather invisible to the rest of the world, even to our good friends. Others rarely see the cat we know. This is partly because of the private nature of cats, the way that they come out of their shell when others aren't around. Plus, people aren't likely to see you at the park with them or walking down the street with them. Even when our animated, loving cat meets our friends in our home, our cat may act more distracted or shy than usual. So, it's this different kind of grief because, if you have a human child, then your friends are likely to know that child, to perhaps have a relationship with them, to have a bond with them. When your children are animals, and especially when they're cats, and they might, my cats were feral, and they imprinted on me, they bonded to me and not to anybody else. It was hard for people to see who they were to me, because it was only in the privacy of our own home when nobody else was here that they would come out and be fully themselves, no holds barred. They weren't nervous about anything. They would just be their complete, silly, sweet selves. And people don't see that, and they don't have a relationship with your babies the way you do. They don't tend to grieve with you. And that is the hardest part. It's like, I'm the only one that's going to grieve this hard. That is so lonely, but also so special, that I knew them in a way that nobody else ever did. And they knew me in a way nobody else ever will. After all, there are so many more good memories than painful ones. It's just that the painful ones are more recent. Having your special scrapbook helps you shift your focus over time to what you most want to remember. That haunts me a lot, that the recent memories are so painful and traumatic, and because they're more recent and because they're traumatic, they stand out so much, and they're so specific. You can point to exactly what happened during this awful time. Whereas, if you look at the years of our relationship, and if somebody asks, what's your favorite memories? Well, mostly what I see is just, an endless stretch of time where my babies were there. I just see, it's not always specific times that we snuggled, but it's that we snuggled every day, And so these really awful recent memories tend to stand out and want to take all the attention. And it can take a long time to be able to look back at pictures and not feel that sting, and instead feel like you're going to smile because you're so happy to see that memory. I wanted to mention this in case anybody wants to know about it. The Association for Pet Loss and Bereavement site, aplb.org, offers pet loss support in a live chat room with a trained moderator. There is no cost for this service. I've been thinking about doing some kind of grief group for animals specifically, and it's just one of those things where I am hurting so much I can't make myself do it, but I'm sure it would help. And then I think I read these poems last time, but I'm going to read them again. Do Not Stand at My Grave and Weep by Mary Elizabeth Fry. Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift uplifting rush of quiet birds in circling flight. I am the soft starshine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die. That one always gets me. Because even though what we want more than anything is to be with our loved ones physically here in this life, they're in the fabric of the universe. You can't create or destroy energy. And one of the things I loved about this book is she talks about the way that we kind of download our consciousness from the universe, from the atmosphere, into this vessel. This vessel is not what's important. Our consciousness is out there, and so the one that we love is never actually gone. This is Death is Nothing at All by Henry Scott Howard. Death is nothing at all. I've only slipped away to the next room. I am I and you are you. Whatever we were to each other, that we still are. Call me by my old familiar name. Speak to me in the easy way which you always used. Put no difference into your tone. Wear no forced air of solemnity or sorrow. Laugh as we always laughed at the little jokes we enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me. Pray for me. Let my name be ever the household word that it always was. Let it be spoken without effect, without the trace of a shadow on it. Life means all that it ever meant, is the same that it ever was. There is absolute unbroken continuity. Why should I be out of mind? Because I am out of sight. I am but waiting for you in an interval, somewhere, very near, just around the corner. All is well. Okay, so, and then there are some from the last video that I just want to remind you of. Good Grief on Loving Pets Here and Hereafter. That is one of the only ones that I've ever found traditionally published about pet loss. Touching Two Worlds, and Notes on Grief. And then there are a bunch of others. I just read this one, How to Live When a Loved One Dies, and this has a lot of more practical meditation advice, physical things to do to cope with it. And then these I haven't even gotten to yet. Listen, I realized that I was getting oversaturated with it and it was becoming more painful than helpful. So I haven't read these yet, but How to Go On Living When Someone You Love Dies. It's okay that you're not okay. Meeting grief and loss in a culture that doesn't understand. I liked the sound of that. And then these are some self-published ones that I found. Repairing the Heartbreak of Pet Loss Grief. The Amazing Afterlife of Animals, Messages and Signs from Our Pets on the other side. Those can be really healing to read about people's stories of knowing that they're getting a signs from pets in the afterlife, so that's very similar. Identifying Messages from Pets in Heaven. And then that's really specific. My cat has died, what do I do? Making Decisions and Healing the Trauma of Pet Loss. And then I found The Art of Grieving, the beauty behind Victorian mourning customs. So there's a whole bunch for you. I'm really sorry if you need these resources and if you're going through something similar. And then I wanted to show you this artist that I know from Instagram sent me a card, and it is just this beautiful, beautiful image of Caddy greeting Springer. And when I saw that, I just lost it. like picturing that gives me a lot of peace. And then I made this ring, which is an ashes ring. It's kind of hard to see, but on Etsy there are some sellers that will send you the ring setting and then a mold with resin to put the ashes in, and I added little bits of fur too, and then you make your own stone and put it in the setting yourself if you don't want to send ashes away. And then this is like still just completely surreal to me because I've been wearing this ashes necklace for Caddy for almost 2 years, and now I have springers on there. So there's a lot of ways to memorialize, and I'm moving through those things in my way and just trying to take care of myself right now, and it's really hard. So without further ado, enjoy these clips of Springer being the sweetest, best little boy in the whole world. Love of my life, my two babies. I had 2 loves of my life, and that's really lucky. I was really, really lucky for a long time. So I don't know when I'll see you again, but I had to get this out there. Thank you for watching, and I'm really sorry if you're going through this too.